Oh, welcome in to the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Braden. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. Man, we got a great show lined up for you. No Cousin Shane, giving Cousin Shane the day off here. The man works hard. It's a Christmas holidays right around the corner. But this may be one of the best shows, one of the most unique shows we've ever done without Cousin Shane. We got my buddy Braden Gall in studio for a long interview here. We kind of touched on a lot of topics, some SEC, some kind of the business of just podcasting and where this is all going. So I think you guys will really appreciate it. Braden and I had some whiskey and unfiltered discussion, so we'll get to that in a moment. We do have some relatively big news and notes around the SEC and a bowl game to quickly recap here. And I know I said I was going to try to do my best to do a live show right after the Las Vegas Bowl, but hell, considering the Florida Gators didn't even show up for the damn game, I figured, why should I show up for a post-game show that nobody's going to watch? Because my God, was that a stinker. Saturday afternoon, Florida, you know by now, dropped the Las Vegas Bowl 30-3 against Oregon State. Not a stunning loss by any means. I mean, hell, I picked them to lose the game, but I thought they'd be a lot more competitive than they actually were. I mean, this was pathetic. And I'm not trying to pile on Billy Napier, but we got to pile on here for a second because they kicked a field goal with 37 seconds left in the game to keep their NCAA streak alive of scoring points that dates back to 1988, 436 games. At least they got that going for you. But, I mean, it was fourth and goal from the 25, so somewhat understandable. Basically, you're just throwing a Hail Mary or you're kicking a field goal to save some kind of face. You don't want to be the Florida coach that has that record snapped on you, so they would have held that against him all offseason, no doubt. So I kind of kid. It's kind of pathetic, though, that you're kicking a field goal down 30 with 37 seconds left in the game, but that is where the Florida Gators were here. They now have a 3-game bowl losing streak for the first time since the Ron Zook era, which unfortunately came from 2002 to 2004. They dropped all 3 of those bowls there, and Zook was shown the door. But going back to the game, God, was it ugly. And if you survived to the fourth quarter, man, you're either a diehard or you're just a sick bastard like myself here. Florida had 2 yards. Count them, 2 in the second quarter. They had 5 yards in the third quarter. I mean, they were just putrid on offense. 33 rush attempts for the Gators, 39 rushing yards. Little over a yard per carry. Jack Miller, first game as the starting quarterback for the Florida Gators. Probably going to be his last. 13 of 22, 180. He just looked all out of sorts, basically from the initial snap of the game. I mean, he was inconsistent, inaccurate, and it's not like he didn't have a month to prepare for this. Well, a month, that's unfair to Jack Miller. I mean, they basically had a week and a half, 13 days, something like that, so nearly 2 weeks to prepare. But again, penalties killed the Florida Gators. This is something that Billy Napier was going to harp on all offseason. We got to get these. This has been haunting the Gators for damn near decades. 11 penalties, 82 yards, 9 offensive drives, 4 were 3-and-outs. Just awful, awful football. ETN and Johnson, our 2 stud running backs, each had 14 yards on the ground apiece. Just a no-show by the offense. And Billy Napier, now he's got a losing record as a head coach of the Florida Gators. The worst debut record for a Florida coach since dating back to the 70s, I saw. A coach there went 0-10 his first year. But this is the worst debut since that time. But that's the negative. I mean, it was all negative on Saturday. But that don't mean I'm selling all my stock in Napier. I hear it. Sunbelt Billy, all this, blah, 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 blah. I get it. For the Florida haters out there, they love to... I don't understand the Sunbelt Billy. Like, why you call him that? Because he dominated the Sunbelt? I mean, most coaches dominate at a lower level and they move up. Nick Saban started in the MAC. Brian Kelly started in Division II before he got his MAC job. I mean, it's a natural progression for a coach to go from a lower level to the SEC, but I digress. Urban Meyer, another one. He was at Bowling Green. They didn't call him Mac Urban or anything. I don't know. I just think that's so stupid to say. But we'll play a little bit of his comments here. You know, they're kind of boring like he always is, but who cares what he says in the press conference? It's the future of the program. Recruiting is doing well. But I think when we sit here and we look back at the debut season, disappointing season, no doubt, started by beating Utah. Those of us that were hyping up the Gators, we were on cloud nine. I know a lot of Gator fans were as well. But I think the main takeaway, aside from being left with a roster devoid of talent, thank you very much, Dan Mullen, for all the criticism that Anthony Richardson got, we saw here on Saturday what this team is without that guy. Now, that's not to say he didn't have some duds, like the Kentucky game certainly comes to mind. He had a horrible performance, and of course they lost it. But without Anthony Richardson, they basically had nothing. And I know Osiris Torrance was out. He opted out. That was huge. The list of opt-outs was huge. Ventrell Miller, heart of the defense, didn't play. Justin Shorter. I mean, Florida basically all season had one receiver. It was Ricky Pearsall or it was Justin Shorter. And they both got banged up during the season. So this cannot go on, no doubt, if you're Billy Napier. And again, we've hit on it. 3 SEC home games next season. You open the season at Utah. I don't know how good Utah is going to be, but hell, they've been pretty good for damn near a decade here. It's going to be a tricky game. Gonna have to bounce back in year 2 before I start hitting the panic button down there in Gainesville. But it all goes back to Anthony Richardson, when he was a human highlight reel at times. Incredible, incredible athlete. Didn't have it all together as a passer, but this is basically the same thing we were saying in the preseason. This team is going to go far as Anthony Richardson can take them, and at times, brilliance, at times, terribly inconsistent. And without him, just awful. So, obviously, he's not coming back. He's off to the NFL. So, we have to find that identity. Is it going to be the ground and pound with Johnson and Etienne? Losing some of our best linemen. The offensive line looked somewhat like a train wreck against the Oregon State Beavers. We'll see how that's addressed. But, yeah, sour taste left in the mouth of the Florida Gators, no doubt. This was one of the worst Florida Bowl performances I can remember. Dan Mullen got destroyed by Oklahoma in the bowl game, so that you could chalk that one up too. But too many of these in recent history for the Florida Gators. Billy Napier's got to turn that around. Got to stop getting these embarrassing performances, and we'll see. Again, I'm not judging them on this season. Not a great season. You lost to essentially everyone of significance. Anybody you want to beat as a Florida fan, you lost to. All the rivals. Hell, you even lost to Vanderbilt. So, again, if you want to judge them and say it's a failing grade, I get it. But dealt a tough deck of cards. And right now, with the recruiting, I'm still in on him. But next season, I think next season, it's crazy to say, but that's where we are at the SEC. 2 seasons. If you're terrible after 2 seasons, we may be cutting the cord on the Billy Napier era. But again, we're far, far, far too early to be really having that conversation.
From today, right? I think that's the key, right? It's fuel for the fire. Obviously, it causes you to evaluate a lot of different things. But hats off to Oregon State. They won the game today. No question about that. So what questions do we have here? I think today's probably an outlier to some degree, if that makes sense. But, I think that, we had some momentum there. We had some missed opportunities, in particular, late in the year. And I think that's what we got to learn from, is that experience. We're in position there after A&M Carolina. What did we learn, right, going to Nashville to play? What did we learn going to Tallahassee to play, right? and then certainly a quick turnaround to play the bowl game. So, I see opportunity. I see a group. What I'm observing in there, I think is a positive for the Gators. The key is that we learn from these experiences, right? We've got to not only the players, but also all parts of our organization. In year one, there's a lot of work been done, since day one to right now. So we're fortunate in that we're going to get a little bit of a break here. We'll turn the page and we'll come back and work harder than ever. Yeah, no, I really do believe that. Sometimes I think the result, doesn't necessarily show maybe the growth we've observed. I think the dynamic within our team, within our locker room, where we started to where we're at today, right? The connection there, the relationship piece. I think our issues on the field have been execution specific. I do think that you're always working on the culture part, but I do think we made a ton of progress in that area. I mean, just what I observed in that locker room compared to maybe some of the things that we observed when we first got here is a completely different ball club.
Now, on the complete other end of the spectrum, great news here for Alabama going into the Sugar Bowl as Bryce Young and Will Anderson are both suiting up for the Crimson Tide. I kind of thought this was coming on a recent episode. Me and Steven Lasson going back and forth on this one. Shout out Steven. He is the man, but he missed this one because Nick Saban's Crimson Tide program, they're not going to lie down for anybody. I know they didn't get to the college football playoff, didn't even make the SEC championship. Those are the goals every year in Tuscaloosa. But Bryce Young, Will Anderson, they love being college football players. They're going to suit up one more time. Let's kick it over to Nick Saban. I thought some great words of wisdom from Coach Saban and also what this means for the rest of the team. Not only this season, but perhaps in seasons to come for the Crimson Tide.
It's kind of interesting that, people opt out of playing, for their team. And, the way you create value for yourself is to play football. That is the best way you can create value for your future. And when you do that against good competition, I think that creates value for your future. I hear guys all the time say, I'm going to get ready for the NFL. Well, what do you mean? You getting ready for the combine? A lot of the things you do at the combine are not even relevant to what you do on the football field. So, every time you have an opportunity to compete, if you're a great competitor, and I think these two guys are great competitors, and that's why they wanted to play, and that they want to try to continue to create value for themselves, be good teammates, help their teammates play, well in the game, and that may sound old-fashioned in a lot of ways, but I sort of respect that.
Yeah, on Bryce and Will and everybody else playing, what does it mean to you as their coach that some of your biggest leaders want to, finish out the season? And as a sport, what do you think it means for college football for some of the biggest players to stay and play the bowl game?
Well, I think it sets a great example for, guys that, respect their teammates, want to be a part of their team, know the impact that they can make, the value that they can make, that they can create for themselves by playing well against good competition. So I'm extremely proud of these guys. We're going to support them in every way that we can. As an institution, we've minimized the risk of them playing in the game by ensuring them the best that we possibly can, so that they're not taking a big risk by playing as much as you can, taking the risk out of it for them. And I can't tell you how much I respect them as competitors, guys that have been great teammates on this team, the leadership that they have given and shown, and I think the leadership that they continue to show by playing in this game.
I just love that message. You create value by proving it on the football field. And certainly you can make the case Bryce Young, Will Anderson, they got nothing left to prove. But, maybe it's not all about themselves. It's about the team. The team still got a lot to prove, and the team is not whole without Bryce Young, without Will Anderson. I just love this. And this is something Braden and I kind of go back and forth on, so we'll get to that in just a second. Arkansas, big news, some good, some bad. Jalen Catalon, star safety, in the transfer portal, will not be returning to Arkansas. That's a blow. But, hell, the guy couldn't stay healthy, as all Razorback fans know. So, I mean, you're kind of without him anyway. But he has got all American potential for anybody that lands him. Sounds like half the SEC is already trying to get Jalen Catalon to come to their program. Gives you an indication, if you didn't know already, what an outstanding player he is. He may be the top defender in the transfer portal. Again, if staying injury-free is critical for him, because he's not been able to do it more often than not. I think he's got essentially 3 season-ending injuries in his 4 seasons as a college football player. But, man, when he's out there, he's a menace. He's a damn menace back here. So I wish him well. But the good news, kind of, defensive coordinator search is over. Travis Williams, former Central Florida defensive coordinator there under Gus Malzahn, former Auburn linebacker coach. I don't think they've officially announced this yet, but basically every outlet is saying Travis Williams, the new defensive coordinator for your Arkansas Razorbacks. And I'll give you the good news here. This guy's going to kill it for you on the recruiting trail. When he was at Auburn, he was one of the most popular assistant coaches in the SEC. And I don't follow Central Florida, but just doing a little research on his time there, that has obviously continued. He's never been a defensive coordinator before. He was a defensive coordinator under Gus at Central Florida. The defense, fairly average, I think is a right word. I'm going to have some people on that actually know what the hell they're talking about when it comes to coordinator grades and things of that nature for these hires that are coming from outside the SEC. So we will certainly discuss Travis Williams and how that fits as a play caller coming to Arkansas. I have to, I admit, while I think he'll be one of the best recruiters, if not the best recruiter on Sam Pittman's staff, this is a gamble. When you talk about Barry Odom, experience, one of the best defensive coordinators in the country, to Travis Williams. Again, I'm not saying he's terrible, but a guy with 2 years experience, somewhat mixed results. This is a gamble. But what we also always say on this show, if you've been listening, players matter more than coaching. Travis Williams will upgrade your roster. So this is going to be an interesting one. But if recruiting was what Sam Pittman was after, he nailed it with the hiring of Travis Williams as his defensive coordinator. Now, real quick here, these are kind of related. Auburn, real quick. They were set to host Grayson McCall, Coastal Carolina transfer quarterback. Did not get him over the weekend. Why? You say, oh, God, this is the guy that Stephen Lasson kind of said. He didn't say, I said. But what he had to say about Grayson McCall, who has got like 8,000 yards, 80 touchdowns, 8 interceptions in 3 seasons as Coastal Carolina starting quarterback, sounds a hell of a lot like Hendon Hooker. So I'd love to have him on my team. But who Stephen's got number 1 as his transfer portal quarterback, Devin Leary, visited Auburn over the weekend. This comes after visiting Kentucky. I know there's some momentum there for the Wildcats. Think they got it in good with Devin Leary, former NC State quarterback. Many have him pegged as the top transfer portal quarterback. We got us a little bidding war, I assume. No inside info, but again, these big-time transfer portals, that's what's driving this. Auburn, Kentucky, Missouri. I don't think he's visited Missouri, but Missouri fans are convinced. Drink coached him 10 years ago, so he's going to Missouri. We'll find out. But Devin Leary, a hot commodity here, visiting Auburn. I think that's huge. Well, clearly, Hugh Freeze trying to upgrade that quarterback room. We'll see what happens. But speaking of Kentucky, last thing here, Kenyatta Goodwin, 5-star offensive lineman, the highest rated signee for Kentucky in over a decade. Remember all that drama this time a year ago? Michigan State, Kentucky, back and forth and back and forth. Well, he's already gone after a year. Played 11 games. I don't believe he had 1 start. But this is a blow. I mean, I saw a lot of Kentucky fans rationalizing, hell, our offensive line was terrible. This guy couldn't get on the field. Not a loss. Well, offensive line is the biggest developmental position on the football field. And if you want to run off one of the best, most promising offensive linemen on your roster, by all means, because I guarantee you Kenyatta Goodwin is going to go to a Power 5 team here, and he's going to be a player down the line, if I had to imagine. So, big blow for Kentucky, losing the most highly touted prospect they've signed in under Mark Stoops, and according to 24/7 Sports, the number 3 ranked prospect to ever sign with Kentucky. So that's a blow. But hey, that's the bad news. The good news, Graham Mertz, quarterback from Wisconsin, has visited. The fact that he's visiting after Devin Leary, I don't know. I don't know if that tells you anything. Maybe they're less confident on Devin Leary. Maybe he's just a backup plan. I don't know. Mertz come down there getting the vision for the program. But certainly Kentucky's going to add a quarterback. Now we just wait to see who that's going to be. But all right, hey, went a little bit longer than I expected there. Let's get to this interview with Braden Gall, Athlon Sports, 440 Sports, all over the place here with Braden. I hope you guys really appreciate this interesting interview that I sure had a fun time recording with Braden.
Braden Gall, thanks for coming in, man.
Oh, we're rolling already, huh? All right.
Just get right into it, man. No need to. We've been BSing here for about 10, 15 minutes, so we're cutting short for time.
Cheers.
Appreciate you coming in. This is the first time I've drank hard liquor in this studio, but we've done beer many a time.
Soft liquor, yeah.
Yeah. So how's it going?
It's good, man. Season always slows down. I appreciate that. Like I get to actually take a chance to breathe a little bit.
Yeah.
Come in here, hang out with you, have a glass, have a sip, and holiday season's around the corner. So been good. How about you?
Yeah, it's going well, man. And like you said, I love what I do. It's not even a job, really, but I needed a slight break. You know what I mean?
Dude, it's funny because, like, I wonder how teams address this stuff, you know? Because it's funny, I always get to, like, middle of October, and the excitement of the beginning of the season has worn off, right? You get so jacked up for, like, media days and, like, camps opening up and quarterback battles and all this fun stuff, new coaches. And then you reach there's a grind point in the middle of the season where you're not close enough to championship Saturday and the playoff, but the initial fun has worn off, you know, like the adrenaline. And that's I wonder how teams handle that. Like that just in general, like I'm assuming the best coaches have to work extra hard to get teams through, you know, like the last 3 weeks of October so that they can then say, look, we're 3 wins away from X or a bowl game or winning a division or whatever. And I feel the same way as a media member. You know, think about us, you know.
Yeah.
Like people need to worry about us here. No.
Well, let me ask you that. Do you think that's why there's not the sole reason, but you think that is a reason there's so many bowl opt-outs? Like players are just like, why the hell do I want to go to? Because I'm surprised we even got it in like the Orange Bowl for Tennessee players. And
You're surprised people are opting out?
Yes.
Why?
Because Tennessee, I mean, you know as well as anybody, I mean, it's been a decade plus of dismay. This is one of the biggest games most of these players will ever play in their life.
I mean, I would ask why. Like, why would Jalen Hyatt like hit the most important moment?
The best bowl game he's ever played was a Music City Bowl.
Well, but what does a bowl game really mean to, like, it's not 1975, you know, when the Sugar Bowl was like one of 6 bowls, and if you got there.
You don't think there's something to winning 11 games at Tennessee?
Oh, sure.
That hasn't won. When's the last time they won 11 games?
Sure, but I don't think you and I can be upset about it if his teammates don't care.
I'm not upset, but I'm just wondering. I guess it's just surprising. Like, I get it
I'm not surprised. If you have NFL upside,
right?
Like, you could be right now working on – now, I'll give him credit because he's actually going to be with the team, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, right now, he could be in Arizona working with the receiver specialist training for the Combine, which is like 8 weeks away, which is the most important moment of his entire life.
Right.
From a financial future standpoint. And so it's not a surprise at all that you want to take a knee injury off the table, right? Like, I don't think that weighing that to 10 wins versus 11 wins or an Orange Bowl win for Jalen Hyatt in his life, I just don't think it's – and again, his teammates don't care at all. Like, Joey Bosa famously sat out the entire season. Like, he got injured in like week 2 and he sat out the whole season, and the most support he got was from his Ohio State teammates. So GMs don't care. I kind of find it interesting that, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I find it interesting that we're still having the conversation that Tennessee fans are like, well, how could you quit on your team? And I'm like, the team doesn't think that. Like, the team doesn't give a shit. Sorry, can we cuss?
Oh yeah, it's completely unedited.
That's what I thought. But like, the team doesn't care at all. So you can't be more offended than the teammate is, and the teammate is supportive of Jalen Hyatt. So Leonard Fournette, Christian McCaffrey, they sat out. They both went top 10 in the draft. David Ajabo for Michigan last year injured his knee in warming up in the combine, and it cost him hundreds of thousands of dollars in the draft. So I don't blame people for choosing their own financial best interests and minimizing risk at the most important part of their entire lives. I just don't.
Now let me ask you this:
a
little slightly different, but it's also another opt-out, but it's really just going pro and focusing on that. But what'd you think? What'd you make of Anthony Richardson going pro and not playing? Again, I guess you can make the same argument. Las Vegas Bowl, who cares?
Especially with no other players on the Florida team playing in the game.
Right. But what do you think about him actually making that decision to not to miss the game, but to go pro? Because I mean, how many games of film does he have?
Not a lot, and not a lot of training in what the NFL offenses are going to ask him to do.
Yeah.
Like, how do you beat him? You beat him this year when they were playing against high-level competition.
Yeah.
The way you beat him is just keep him in the pocket and make him throw, make him work through his progressions, and try to pinpoint the guys in the pocket. Because once he gets out of the pocket, everybody saw what he could do in the Utah game, the Tennessee game. Like, his athletic ability is so captivating for NFL people. It's obvious. I mean, I don't think you don't even need to be a scout to see the talent.
Right.
Like, the talent's there. I think he's going to have a very difficult time adjusting to NFL defenses, and it's going to take. I think if you're going to draft him in the first round, let's say, you better be willing to train him for 2 years. Like, maybe have him sit for a couple of years. Like, I don't think you can expect Anthony Richardson to start right away. I just don't think he's.
Yeah.
I don't think the game awareness and the processing and the understanding of coverages, I don't think it's there yet. I think he gets there. But you draft him because he's 6'4", 240 pounds, and runs a 4.4.
Right.
Like, he's a freak in nature athletically.
I was a little surprised he didn't. Not that he opted out, but I thought he would enter the portal and see what are these NIL offers out here. I mean, I realize NFL
That's an interesting angle.
Is a lot more, but I don't know that he's guaranteed to be a first-round pick. I don't even know if he's guaranteed to be a second-round pick. I assume he is, but I would have tested both waters, so to speak, if that makes sense.
That's a good strategy, and I do think it's an interesting one. I think if you're clearly not a draftable player or like a 6th or 7th round fringe draft pick,
like what would he do in Josh Heupel's offense?
He'd be pretty good. Again, the accuracy is a question.
Yeah.
That's why I think Joe Milton isn't very good and has never been good. And I took my 6-year-old to her first ever SEC football game. And the reason she got to see so many big touchdowns is because Tennessee ran the ball against Vanderbilt, not because Joe Milton missed. Other than the first pass to Jalen Hyatt, like on the first play,
yeah,
I think he missed like 37 open receivers after that. So I actually think the name I really love for Heupel's offense is DJ Uiagalelei from Clemson. Who's in the portal. I think he would run that offense really well. Just deep shots, physical, run the football. He could be a really nice piece in there, and I think he would be an improvement.
He's not just another Joe Milton. I haven't seen much of him.
I think he's better than Joe Milton. I think he's more accurate. That's all.
Okay.
Again, Milton is a great everything. But you have to be able to throw the football to your teammates at some point. But Richardson, I think, like I've talked to some scouts, and I'll reach down and pick up this name here. But I was talking to Mel Kiper about it, and I was like, how has this season changed your board? How has it affected who you like and who you don't like? And he's like, I came into this season with C.J. Stroud number 1. I'm leaving with Will Levis at number 1 overall. And I was like, really? And he goes, and I think Anthony Richardson's going to fly up boards. I've got him at number 3 behind Stroud. And I was like,
wow.
He goes, Braden, who would you take? And I go, Bryce Young, Mel. Bryce Young. I've stood next to him, and I know Bryce is, like, I'm not a small person.
He's tiny.
Bryce is a small dude, but the things he does, nobody else can do.
Yeah.
So I would take Bryce number 1, but I think Richardson. This stuff. Every NFL scout thinks they can fix everything.
Mm-hmm.
That's why you draft Maurice Claret. And then because you think you can fix it, and sure enough, he ends up drinking vodka on the practice field. These coaches are so.
Is that bad?
I think so. Out of a water bottle. It's funny. It's just like. You're going to see Anthony Richardson's specs, and you're going to see the tape, and it's not going to match in your head as a scout.
Yeah.
But it doesn't matter because they again, the number 1 pick last year was like the 5th or 6th best defensive player on Georgia's team.
Yeah.
So it's all about this freakish athletic stuff. And they fall in love with it. They think they can fix the other stuff. And I think Anthony Richardson I think he's a first-round pick. I think he's a late first-round pick. Somebody will take a chance on the talent. And if that's where you're at on boards and that's what scouts are telling you and NFL people are telling you and agents are telling you, then you got to go pro.
Right.
You got to go pro because even the best NIL deals are not close to first-round money.
Right.
And starting your clock as soon as possible to make real life-altering revenue, which, again, is why you sit out a bowl game.
Mm-hmm. Well, we already went off the rails from what I was planning on going. You can attest to, that. And also, I got no notes. So I don't like notes when we're doing it in person.
No, man.
I think it's
That's
rude.
the best way to go.
But I wanted to ask you, because to my knowledge, this is basically like the only real job you've ever had is like media stuff. I could be wrong, but
What's like you said earlier? Like, what's a real job? Like, I don't.
Right. So I'm just curious your background for those that don't know. I mean, everybody knows you from ESPN Radio and Athlon Sports and now 440 Sports. I was just wondering if you could, share your story a little bit.
Sure.
And how you got into all that and like.
I don't know why anyone would care.
Like I said, you're not that old yet. It seems like you've been doing this for like 30 years. I'm like, how'd that happen?
I am 40. I'm a man. I can say that. I'm a man. I'm 40. Come at me. So it started. I worked at a rock and roll station in college. I went to University of Tennessee, and literally, I was working at a rock and roll station one night, and they were changing the hip hop station to a sports format, to the Sports Animal. And they literally were switching overnight from a hip-hop station to a sports station. And the program director, Mickey Dearstone, if you listen to Vols, Lady Vols basketball or know anything about Tennessee athletics, he was my boss at the time. And he just goes, hey, do you want to – I'd been there for about 6-8 months, kind of pre-graduation. And then after graduation, he goes, you want to work on a sports channel? I was like, hell yeah. So I started producing the midday show. I think.
So you started the Sports Animal.
Josh Ward
Yeah.
taught me literally everything I know about radio, and he was like a 19-year-old kid who was teaching a graduate about how to do run a board and set up remotes and all this other goofy stuff. I had so much fun on the rock side of things because I'm a huge music fan.
Yeah.
And so I was doing a lot of really cool stuff with music that I never thought I was introducing a band in front of a club show at Blue Cats in the Old City. That's a deep cut for those of you who know Knoxville.
Yeah.
And then getting the chance to work in sports, I just was like, all right. So for 2 weeks I did this show, midday production. Brent Hubbs fills in.
Oh, well.
He's driving down to Rivals for the Rivals.com national convention. He takes my resume down on a Friday, gives it to the head of Rivals Radio at the time, which had launched 4 months earlier in Nashville. I got a call on Monday. I drove down on Tuesday to interview. They offered me the job, and I said yes without even thinking for $20,000 a year in Brentwood, Tennessee, which is a very expensive place to live. I had no idea what I was doing. Did not even contemplate the information.
Had you lived in Nashville before?
I went to high school in Nashville.
Okay.
So I was – and at the time I was dating somebody who was moving back, so I was looking to get back to Nashville.
Gotcha.
But the idea of starting as a producer for the only national college sports talk show in the history of this country and working at Rivals.com headquarters was just I was like, oh, I was like, this is incredible. Now I had to get up at 4 a.m. and we were on the air at 6 a.m. and
right.
It was a 3-hour. It felt like a 3-hour graduate class in college football because it's all we did was talk recruiting and coaching and games and players, and I was in heaven. And so I just learned. I just soaked it all in.
So would you consider that you got lucky? Or,
I guess.
Or were you just that good at right out the gate? Or?
I mean, I wasn't. I didn't. If they wanted to hire between me and Josh Ward a better producer, Josh Ward was a better producer. So it wasn't. Almost everything I've learned is sort of self-taught in the radio business. And I'm willing. I work extremely hard.
Yeah.
I'm not going to back down on that.
You got 20 jobs.
Everybody may work as hard as me, but no one works harder. I joke all the time, but I just right place, right time. Brent Hubbs is a great ally to have, sort of saying, hey, look, I got this kid who's going to work real hard, who knows sports.
Yeah.
And I had known recruiting a little bit before then because, again, I was a huge sports nerd growing up. I'd lived in Texas and Georgia and moved around and just huge my first college football game, I was 5 at TCU. My second one was Georgia Tech in Atlanta. Then I went to Longhorn games in Texas. I just grew up going to college football games all across the country. And so it was sort of this natural – weird situation. So I started Rivals.com. We go from 10 hours a week, 2 hours a day to 30 hours a week. Sirius and XM merge. My favorite moment is Coach Orgeron coming into the office with Hugh Freeze wearing matching leather jackets with embroidered
This was
Ole
when
Miss.
Hugh was working under Coach O?
This was Coach O had just gotten the Ole Miss job, and they show up at the Rivals.com office, and me and my other like 24-year-old buddies are like, "What the hell is happening? Why is Coach O walking through our office?" And his lapdog, Hugh Freeze, is walking right next to him, not saying a word to anybody, like walking a step behind him, wearing matching, again, my favorite part, matching leather jackets that have Ole Miss embroidered on the chest. And they're just like walking through the office, getting to know, because Coach O was obsessed with recruiting rankings. And we got him to do some like liners and some reads. He couldn't do any of them right. Like it was so much fun. I wrote it down in like size 12 font, or size like 25 font on a piece of paper, like double space, so that he could read it. And he's like, "You're listening to Rivals Radio on Cyrus 123," and you're like, "It's serious, Coach." And it's 123, but whatever, it's not important. And we ran that promo like 100 million times because it was wrong.
Right.
We thought it was the funniest shit in the world.
Speaking, I hate to cut
and then
you
I moved
off.
to Athlon in 07, and after that, it's rest is history. So
Just to go along with that, though, real quick, did you ever read the book, The Blind Side? I know everybody's seen the movie.
Michael Lewis is one of my favorite authors of all time.
It's very different than the movie.
The book's way better than the movie.
But I thought it was interesting. So apparently Hugh Freeze had cut deals to join Tennessee staff, Philip Fulmer, and he was steering Michael Orr to Tennessee.
Yeah.
And then he didn't want to go to Tennessee, obviously, so he went to Ole Miss. And the story is Hugh Freeze flew down to wherever Coach O was at and basically pitched, "You want to get the most out of this kid, you got to hire me." So it kind of goes funny with your story.
Well, and my favorite part of the Righteous Gemstones Baby Billy performance that Hugh put on at the press conference, I just don't believe anything he says, what was the shout-out to the Tuohys who were there in person. I mean, aside from crying about golfing with media members or whatever, like there's a lot of garbage there. But like when he's like, "Oh, they're the Tuohys over there, my best friends," and I'm like, man, that's a deep cut, especially considering what we know about what you did at Briarcrest in Memphis.
They are apparently responsible as well. I can't remember if it was getting Saban to Alabama or getting Saban to LSU, but they provided the plane, and that family. I don't know much about them aside from the movie and the book.
If they got Saban to Bama or LSU, then they hurt themselves.
Right. That's why it didn't make sense.
No, I don't think it was.
But I think they liked the power or something.
Maybe.
Like they provided the transportation that you couldn't track.
I don't think
some story like that.
I don't. I also just read Talty's book.
I haven't read
John
that yet.
Talty
It's
about
pretty good.
The leadership secrets of Nick Saban. It's interesting. I think there's a lot of anecdotes in there about like how Steve Sarkisian was going to be the head coach in waiting at Alabama. Lots of really interesting stuff. But a big part of it is Saban's move from Michigan State to LSU and sort of how each time he moved, he grew and changed and evolved. And so now we're off on a different topic here. But it's really interesting to read how he gets to LSU and how LSU wanted him and didn't want him and didn't know what to expect. Again, we talk about Brian Kelly not being a cultural fit, which I don't think matters at all. Nick Saban wasn't a cultural fit at LSU. He was a damn good football coach.
Right.
That's all they needed. And LSU finally kind of figured it out. Kind of like Clemson, they figured out investment. They figured out this holistic approach to elevating everything in the program financially. Saban then just took it and ran. And, of course, unfortunately, while I was in college, with a backup quarterback, upsets the 0-1 team in the SEC championship game for Tennessee. And the rest, as they say, for Nick Saban is history. But I don't know what your first question was.
Let me ask you this. Do you have a Hugh Freeze, any like favorite story that you're willing to share?
Favorite. None of them are good.
Or maybe most, I don't know, just the best story, you know?
I mean, Hugh is famous for name searching and DM sliding.
Yep.
Maybe my claim to fame is that I've gotten a few of those.
Yeah.
I don't know. Almost all of them exclusively after positive tweets. Like, I think these are the top 10 candidates for XYZ job. Hey, thanks for mentioning me. Appreciate it. Let's talk, blah, 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 blah. And, like, he just, it's this constant, everything you know about him from the local reporters is almost all true. I think he's creepy. I think he's weird. I don't think he's a criminal. I don't think he should go to prison. But I think there's a difference between like having a leadership role as the most important and influential and highest paid person on a campus full of women who are going to experience, in some way, shape, or form, something assaulty-ish.
Right.
And, like, that happens on every campus. It's not an Auburn problem. It's just a problem on every campus regardless of where you are. And having him, who clearly has 20 years of questionable behavior in and around this subject, I mean, again, he's making 8th grade girls change, without any witnesses, take their shirts off in front of him.
Right.
He's paddling girls in middle school and high school in 1999 as a grown adult with no witnesses. Like, it's just the weirdest shit. And so for then 20 years later to be sliding up into DMs of assault victims, it's clear that the behavior has not changed and that he desperately wants everyone to like him. And I understand that sentiment. It doesn't mean you can. There's certain lines you can't cross that kind of, again, it's not criminal. It's just creepy and weird.
Yeah.
And I think there's a gap between going to prison and being the head coach at Auburn to make $9 million a year as the most powerful person in a leadership role where you've clearly indicated that you don't have that skill in this department of keeping women safe on campus. So, again, I'm not saying Auburn should or shouldn't do it. I'm saying Auburn should own it because I know what Hugh Freeze has done and how he's acted and how he treats people and what he cares about. And that whole thing, that whole press conference, I'm not sure I believe a word he said. Like, it's just my personal opinion.
Right.
If you don't like it, fine. I think he's a solid coach. I think the bigger question about Hugh Freeze is he actually good enough? I think he's a good coach. I think he's going to win 9 games. But, Gus Malzahn beat Nick Saban, right? 3 times?
He beat
Nick
Georgia
Saban.
a couple times.
Beat Georgia a couple times. An SEC championship, Georgia. Pulverized them that year in 2017. Runs the same system. Doesn't have any baggage. You just hired a worse version of Gus Malzahn to replace Gus Malzahn, and then you spent $30 million in the process to do it. I don't get it. Get it. That same team that beat Alabama, which took 5 turnovers inside their own 40-yard line to do that, lost to Memphis.
Well, I think the funniest thing
Arkansas.
is the people that made that decision, they were the people that run off Gus. So it's kind of like an admission to
and they've wanted
fucked up.
And they've wanted Hughes since he got let go from Ole Miss. And if you notice, I didn't say one thing about escorts, about paying players, about university cell phones. Don't give a shit about any of that stuff.
I thought he was more relatable when I found out he was getting – I was like, this is a guy I will hang out with.
Paying players now is cool. The problem is, that's the coolest thing he's ever done probably. But what the problem is that wasn't a huge advantage for him at the time. It's not an advantage for him anymore.
Right.
So now everybody's doing it. So that brings him down a peg again. That's another question. It's just a huge risk. Do I think, escorts and prostitution should be legal and regulated in this country? Yes, I do. I think victimless crimes we should be allowed to do whatever we want, and let's whatever. I don't think that's that controversial that people can use drugs or drink alcohol or whatever. Do what you want to do in this country. I don't care about any of that stuff. What a man does in his marriage is between him and his wife. I don't care. It's not my business. But intimidating sexual assault victims in the middle of federal investigations, not cool. It's not a cool thing to do. So Auburn, just own it. Just say, look, we're valuing football over everything else, and if anything happens, it's on us.
Yeah.
And that's what you got to do. And that's it. Your priorities are football, and that's fine. It's the SEC. But just tell us that. Don't talk to us like we're freaking toddlers.
Right. All right, I hate to do another 180, but I thought about this while you were discussing, your rise, so to speak, in the media world. But so
not sure I'd call it a rise.
You were essentially there from the start of internet radio to now you got your own business, which is not internet radio, but it's kind of like
it kind of is. Yeah.
Kind of, yeah. I mean, that's kind of what I kind of can. That's when old people are like, "What do you do?" I'm like, "You've heard of the radio, right?" It's like the internet, but it's like So, what? My question to you though is what is your thoughts on the state of radio and entertainment? Well, not just radio, but yeah. I mean, I feel you because I've been offered jobs here in Nashville, and I'm like, I very much appreciate the consideration, but not interested at all,
It's funny. I was talking to somebody. I'll keep their name out of it, but somebody very, very high on a national radio platform 2 years ago during the pandemic. And one of the things that stuck in my head about the conversation, because I've been in radio my whole life, but SiriusXM as a satellite on the college football channel is sort of a hybrid between regular radio and a podcast. And part of the reason I love a podcast, which, YouTube podcast, digital content like what you and I do, is we get to spend time with stuff. You and I can sit here and talk about Liam Cohen's influence on Kentucky for 30 minutes if we wanted to. And if you care about that, you're going to be with us on that conversation. You cannot do that in radio.
Right.
There is a science to radio where I have to win the quarter hour by keeping you listening for 5 minutes. I've got to move on from subject A to subject B to subject C as fast as possible, keep you moving, set up audio, tease going into break, come pay off the tease when we come out of break. There's a science to it all. Create conflict, increase anxiety and enragement, and keep you tuned in, whether you agree with me or disagree with me. It is a scientific medium, and you execute it. Like when I do ESPN radio, I have to execute it that way. On Saturday mornings, we can't spend 30 minutes on Liam Cohen.
Right.
We have to talk about the Iron Bowl for 2 minutes, and then we got to move on. And SiriusXM, I was sort of training without knowing for podcasts and digital space, because you don't have to live by those same rules, because we've already eliminated anyone who doesn't care about college football. So you tune into that channel because you care about college football. So I could spend 10 minutes talking about the Oregon offensive coordinator, Kenny Dillingham, going to become the head coach at Arizona State. I could spend 8 or 9 or 10 minutes on that on a segment because that audience already wants the college football content. So that's sort of a middle ground, because you still have to operate within the stay entertaining, keep people up here, keep people engaged, that kind of stuff. It's not like this where we get to sit down and just see where it goes like two normal human beings.
Right.
But radio, like when you hear someone on radio and you're pissed off about what they're saying, just know that they've won. That's their job, is to get you enraged and engaged. And if that's what they're like, there's a guy in Nashville that gets all kinds of heat for being this hot take guy. And I'm like, that's because that's the nature of the business. The nature of the business is not Howard Stern.
Right.
The nature of the business is Skip Bayless. Say outlandish shit to get people pissed off on both sides, agreeing and disagreeing. And as long as I can create that situation where I've got two divided groups of people arguing over one topic, I've picked the right topic as a radio host. And that's not what we want to do in our world, at least for me.
Yeah.
I want to sit and talk about Mike Leach for 45 minutes and really understand the man, the stubbornness, the complications, the quirkiness, the insatiable desire to learn and read, and how that led him to the air raid, and how the air raid has now influenced literally everything you see on any football field. Mike Leach is the most influential name and mind of our generation. High school, pro, college, full stop. And you cannot have that conversation on radio. You just can't. You have to do it in a space like this, or on a podcast, or on a YouTube video. Like, it's got to be in a digital world. And the conversation I had, to bring it back to that one guy that I was talking to, who was extremely successful, president of one of the biggest sports radio companies in the country. I was talking to him about all this same stuff, and he goes, talent's not the problem, content's not the problem, the distribution model is fucked. And how many radios do you own? I own one. It's in my truck. That's it. This.
Right.
This is where everybody gets their information. And I still think there's certainly there's thin lack of depth on a lot of apps. Instagram and TikTok is just straight 10-second consumption with no depth at all. But there's also I think there's a big appetite for what you do and for what I do, and that is to have really thoughtful, entertaining, silly, funny, serious conversations about the things that we love.
Right.
And in this case, SEC football, and just enjoy it. Let's debate like Marcus Satterfield leaving. Is that good or bad for South Carolina? I don't know. South Carolina fans aren't sure. I certainly don't think they did a good job hiring. but like, we can debate that and have a really interesting conversation with it. That doesn't work anywhere else.
Yeah.
The distribution model of radio is the problem, not the people or the content. It's the model.
Do you? And I would assume that you do. But do you think as time goes on, that's just more and more and more of a dead model? Because I don't know how anybody younger than me listens to that.
Yeah.
And I can't listen to it.
It's convenience in a car probably, but I don't. Again, I plug the phone in I Bluetooth
Right.
the phone in, and I'm listening to pods all day.
That's
all
what
I do.
everybody does, or
Right.
music.
So it's interesting. 2020, and part of the reason I launched my company was these trends. 2020 was the first year where men 25 to 54 in this country got their sports content more from podcasts than sports talk radio. It's the first time that they switched, right?
Right.
And the ad spending, of course, is off the charts. You got Patreon shows, you got all kinds of stuff, and so it's just, again, I think there's obviously a thirst for in-depth, thoughtful, nuanced, funny, creative content, all of which sort of gets sanded down when you do radio.
Right.
And I just don't like if I need a press conference, if I'm trying to listen to a press conference for Mike Vrabel for the Titans, that's when I'll probably turn on the radio because I want to listen to the press conference if I'm driving somewhere during that time.
Mm-hmm.
But like, there's not a part of me, and I love and respect all the people in Nashville that do radio. Like, I know all of them personally; they're all very talented and very good. But the model, like, I'd rather talk to those hosts on a podcast because then I actually am going to get time to hear what they have to say. Like, you know, Joe Rexrode's a friend of mine. He writes eloquently about SEC football, the Titans, the Preds, everything in Nashville. He's got a 4-hour show, and I'm like, Joe, I don't listen to your show, dude. I'm sorry. Like, I had a beer with him the other night, and I'm like, I don't listen to your show, but I'll sit here and talk to you for an hour about what those same topics are because I'm going to get better content. I'm going to get more thoughtful and nuanced content. And I don't mean like off the record stuff. I mean like the same exact conversation about why Hendon Hooker wasn't in New York. He and I can have a very different conversation sitting around a table having a beer than he has to have on the radio. And so to me, that's all the podcast is. It's just me and you sitting here talking about why Hendon Hooker belonged in New York, Stetson Bennett didn't belong anywhere near it. And let's have that conversation in a thoughtful and creative and funny way instead of you turn on your radio and you're like, I can't believe Stetson Bennett is New York. That's just terrible. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Call in. What do you think? Like that's
Yeah.
Let's talk about it. Let's have more time with it, and because people care about it. Like Tennessee fans care that Hendon Hooker didn't go. I would tell you, Tennessee fans, relax. Don't worry about it. It doesn't take away from the memories. I voted him number 2 on my ballot.
Yeah, I saw that. And you had Bryce Young. You had the correct
I
ballot.
had Bryce Young at 3, Hendon Hooker 2, Caleb Williams 1. And I understand. I had so many text messages that are just like, I can't believe he didn't get to New York. Da, 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 da. And I'm like, eventually I just go, who cares? Like, don't get outraged by it. He's going to finish 5th. If he doesn't play poorly against Georgia and South Carolina, doesn't get hurt, he probably wins the thing. That sucks. You can think about that if you want to, or you can remember the Alabama game.
Yeah.
And you can remember 10 wins for the first time since I was in college. Again, I took my daughter. I think there's so much serendipity to this. My 6-year-old daughter melted down because I wasn't taking her to the Vanderbilt-Tennessee game. Like, melted down. And if you have kids, you understand, like, the scream from the other room when somebody's hurt. It's a real different scream. There's the cry, whine, mope scream where you're just not getting what you want, and you're like, you can tell what that is. This was like in between, and I've never heard it before. She was genuinely disappointed in me as a father. She was like, because we've taught her Go Big Orange in Tennessee and all this stuff, and like I don't put that persona out there on my shows very often because I want to stay objective as possible. That's just my preference.
Yeah.
And it was raining that night. It was kind of cold in Nashville. And I'm like, but, you know, they'll be here in 2 years. We'll take her to Neyland next year. But she's like falls on the ground and like into my arms, like climbs on top of me and is like just sobbing into my chest. and I look at my wife, and my wife's like, her eyebrows go up and go, because like the game had just kicked off and we were watching it at home. And so I was like, all right, let's go, honey. We get in the truck. We drive over to West End. We find a free parking spot. I get 2 free tickets. We walk in. We sit on the 30-yard line. She's standing in the rain for 2.5 quarters, watching big play after big play after big play. She looks around one time, and she goes, Dad, there's a lot of orange here. And I was like, welcome to Vanderbilt football, honey. And but, like, that the fact that I got to take my daughter to her first ever SEC football game, and it happened to also be the first time Tennessee had won 10 games since I was in college in 2003. It just felt so like holistic and like the way it was supposed to be. And obviously I'm raising a monster as well. She's been indoctrinated into Nashville music and SEC football. So maybe I'm doing my job after all.
Yeah, sounds like the perfect dad right there. But going back to, you know, the business model and where things are, the other thing that I really like about it, and you don't have to share anything you don't want to.
Sure.
But myself, I've been laid off by
I've been fired twice.
Fox Sports, and the whole time I was at Saturday Down South, there was threat of getting laid off. When I launched my podcast, they threatened to fire me. When I got more reviews than theirs, they threatened to fire me. When I was getting these big-time interviews,
so you were doing
they
your
threatened
job,
to fire
and
me.
they're threatening to fire you.
On and on and on. And I think there's something to be said for that as well, where, you know, you do have like I said, a lengthy history, so you know people. Maybe it's a little different, but I think there's people listening right now that are like, man, I'd love to start a podcast. There's literally nothing stopping them, and the barrier is incredibly low to start it. And I think that is more powerful. Like if I wanted to be a Nashville radio host, that's something you got to work toward, and there's barriers to get you there. There's no barriers. Buy a damn camera. Buy this equipment.
Yeah.
It's not that expensive. Throw it up on the internet, and if it's good, people will find it and they'll tune in. I just think that's outstanding.
Yeah, what year? I'd be curious because we launched. So I still work at Athlon Sports. We've done the Cover 2 podcast, which is all national. College football, and we started that in 2014. And I feel like that was pretty early for sort of like podcasting in general. And so I had experience in that area. I was fired by Rivals for no reasons at all. Not I could rattle them off and we can go through the history. But I was so 07 I moved from Rivals to Athlon, less than a month. One of the best things that ever happened to me. Spent 45 minutes upset with it. Had a beer with my dad, and he's like, "You don't have to get up at 4 o'clock tomorrow morning." I was like, "Oh, that's great." Had 2 more beers, and it was the best thing that ever happened to me, honestly, because I learned from it. I learned I made some mistakes. I figured that out. I corrected those things. Got into Athlon, learned the print business, learned the editing business, the writing business. Got so much experience, and technically, I'm still working there now, like 17 years later. 15 years later. Again, as a kind of like I'm not a full-time employee, but I still work there. And then my show locally in Nashville was canceled like at the start of the pandemic, basically. Not because of the pandemic, but that they just were going to make a change. And I was unemployed. I was still working at Athlon and Sirius and ESPN, so I had my 4 jobs. So only one of them was gone. But I had a 3 and a 1-year-old at the time. The tornado hits Nashville, closes my kids' daycare. We needed someone to be home with the kids, and I happened to be home. My wife was like, "Take some time off. You need to recharge. You've been working for a company you didn't really like working for years." And so I happened to be again, serendipity here, taking time off, being a father, taking care of my kids. But then the pandemic hits. I was on the bus going to the Tennessee-Alabama game at Bridgestone Arena in the SEC tournament when we get word that everything is shutting down. I was on the air the entire night, that whole week on Sirius, trying to talk about like Rudy Gobert spreading COVID and like Tom Hanks getting COVID and the NHL is canceled and college basketball tournament's not going to have fans. And then by Friday, everything is done. And I lost 75, 80% of my revenue. Like everything I worked for 15 years to build was gone. My full-time morning show was gone. ESPN Radio canceled basically said anybody who's part-time is done. SiriusXM wasn't doing live shows anymore either. Like just sports stopped. So all of my stuff stopped. And that's when I started hatching the idea of, all right, well, if I want Nashville sports talk to be better, why don't I do something about it?
Yeah.
And then after like 3 or 4 months of thinking it all through and planning and having conversations with people that know more about this stuff than I do, and I'd already kind of had experience with the podcast, I thought, like Nashville people deserve better. Let's give them the best Preds show. Let's give them the best Nashville SC show. Let's give them the best Titans show. Let's pinpoint and build these communities of people that really care about this stuff. And of course, I was going to do an SEC show. Like, of course, you know this as well as anybody. Like, it's our stuff. Like, the SEC is my baby. Like, it is yours. And while I do this other stuff, the SEC is always going to be my favorite thing in the world in sports. And so, of course, I was going to launch an SEC show. And so the amount of time and work, it's insane. But like when we get down to sit down and do the content like this, there's no more fun. That's the most fun part of my entire career is getting now to sit down with somebody I've known for 10 years and talk about, LSU's offense.
Yeah.
For whatever 20 minutes. And like that's the most fun I have ever. And cuz that's kind of like what Sirius used to be. And so for me it's now SEC and local, and then the college football podcast for Athlon. And I think I'm curious to see what big companies do with people like us,
Oh, yeah.
if they're going to start gobbling up, because that's what happens, right? An industry changes, the model changes, and then the big guys change with it and gobble everything up and then kind of make it their own. You're seeing this with a lot of companies that are they've launched podcast networks.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of just did the same thing, but locally in Nashville. But again, I've kept it to where the hosts make the money. There's Nashville music on there. It's all original Nashville for Nashville by Nashville, and the SEC show, of course. So, which is again a little bit more regional. But I think I don't know why anyone would get their content another way.
Right.
I really don't. Like if I'm a diehard SEC fan, I'm listening to your show. I'm listening to my show. sure, you might pop on Feinbaum, I guess, if you want to be entertained. But like,
I love Feinbaum.
But like, and Paul can do the things that we do when he wants to. But again, he's got to play to sort of a different type of science, which is I've built this expectation that people are going to listen to callers scream at each other,
Right.
which is hilarious and entertaining. But it's not the same as, all right, let's look at yards per play pre-Liam Cohen at Kentucky and yards per play under Scarangelo last year, and look at the yards per play under Liam Cohen.
Right.
And go, all right, it's clear that Kentucky's offense goes like this. And 2021 was the year that he was there, and that's why he's back. And so let's have that conversation. And while Paul can do that eloquently and brilliantly, he can't be too far away from people yelling at each other about Auburn and Alabama. So there's a place for all of it, but I mean, I just believe in our stuff, not you and me personally, but our model. And if I'm a fan of anything in the world, bourbon. Again, there's probably a bourbon podcast for you. There's probably a bourbon community that cares about it as much as you do, that wants to talk about it in a smart, funny, entertaining way. It's not governed by all the FCC stuff.
Right.
Just cussing, like just being able to say shit is so much more fun
Yeah.
than doing radio where I have to like be careful. Like I remember saying something, and this is funny. Now I know you had me in here to ramble, I guess, but so Juwan Jennings gets busted smoking weed on campus somewhere. I can't remember. I could use Janoris Jenkins. That would be an easy one. He's busted like 56 times. But Juwan Jennings is busted, and this is a true story. I was working locally and in Nashville at a local station, and I went on the air and I said, I don't care that Juwan Jennings smoked weed. I don't care. And I didn't say anything else about it. I could say that, like, medical evidence shows you that it's significantly better for you than drinking alcohol. Like, I could go down this list if you'd like me to. The science is in on weed. It's not bad for you. And, I mean, everything in moderation. But I say on the air very casually, I'm like, look, I don't care that Juwan Jennings wants to smoke a little weed in college. Next thing you're going to tell me that kids in college have premarital sex too. Like, oh my God. Like, they're going to drink underage. They're going to smoke weed. They're going to do this stuff. Let's teach them how to be responsible and make the right decisions and put themselves in the right situations to do that stuff, because they're going to do it either way.
Right.
And so on the air, I'm saying, like, just sit at your apartment, dude. Like, why are you driving around with a bag of weed in your car? Like, what are you doing? Just sit at your apartment, smoke your bowl, and have a good time. And, like, no one's ever gotten a bar fight stoned either, by the way. That's never happened. So, like, I kind of joke about it and just, I'm like, Juwan, what are you doing? We got people calling the station. And I got in trouble from a boss saying, like, you can't talk like that on the air. I'm like, what do you mean? All I did was say, college kids smoke weed. And you can't, and he's like, well, it's a gateway drug. I'm like, no, that's scientifically, it's scientifically disproven. It's not a gateway drug. Like, and so I'm like, all the arguments that these two or three people in Nashville were so upset with me for saying that they call my boss, and it just makes the conversation so dumb.
Right.
And my boss was fine. Like, she was fine. It wasn't her fault. But, like, they're like, you can't say that you don't care if he smokes weed. I'm like, why? I don't care. Here's the medical science to back up why I don't care. Like, and it's just that kind of stuff, the corporate overlords and the suits and the FCC and all that garbage. Now we're not talking SEC football, but
No,
it confines your ability to talk about the stuff you love. And
Right.
why put yourself into that box when you can just sit here like this?
Right. And that's to your point. I mean, that's why I started this show. I can say literally anything I want. I can have anyone
And you do.
on. Yeah. And I don't have any influence on what I can and cannot say. I don't have any influence on who I have on the show.
It's funny you say that, because that's kind of part of why I launched my company. It's like, I don't want someone telling me what I can and can't say anymore. I'm
Right.
tired of that.
Only one time have I had, and I didn't even have them on the show, but someone reached out to be on the show. I didn't know who they were, but I knew it would generate some buzz, and it was some country music guy. You would probably know him better than I don't listen to country, but I think his name's like Justin Moore, or
Okay.
big Arkansas fan.
Okay.
And I was like, I looked him up. I was like, he's got millions of followers. I was like, fuck
You need
yeah.
to have this guy on.
And then he ghosted me. And that was a lesson to me. I felt like that was karma. Like,
Or maybe it wasn't I mean, who knows what happened? Like, you never know.
yeah, I mean, I literally don't know. But he said he was a big fan. He said he wanted to go on the show. I had no idea who he was. I was like, he likes Arkansas. He's got millions of followers. I'll have him on. And then he ghosted me. So that told me, just don't do that. Because to me, that's getting away from why I started the show, why I want the show.
Oh, you're talking about, like, why you thought you should
The
go
only
down that
reason I
path.
wanted to have him on because he had a following.
And you thought
I didn't know. I don't know who
right.
he is. I still don't know who he is. But I think he's a huge he was been on game day and all this shit. But so I'm sure it would have been a great conversation. But
Right.
it's not the reason to have someone on because they
Right.
propel your show.
Right.
You have people on like you because I want to talk to you because I respect you and
Go on.
you do great work. And hey, we're here in Nashville. You could come in and this is fantastic. I think are you pressed for time? You
I don't
gotta
know.
Get going?
Yeah, probably need to go.
Okay.
But
Before you go,
I was going to say real fast about just music in general. Like one of the things I love about the SEC and music in Nashville does a lot of this, brings it all together because the alumni groups are here from all over the SEC and there's so much music here. I do think there is something because the South is complicated. It's a complicated history with complicated stories, tragic stories, and I think what makes SEC football so great, along with Southern music, is sort of how we can kind of like it unifies people pretty quickly. And if you can disagree with somebody on so many different things, but if you're going to sit there and listen to Jason Isbell play guitar or watch Alabama football or, we're going to listen to the Allman Brothers or we're going to, like you could tell those stories. And we do that a lot on our show where we have musicians on to talk about, like, again, like the Wild Feathers are a perfect example. They're the theme song for the SEC show that we do, Fringe Element podcast. Make sure you check that out everywhere you get your shows. And the drummer's a huge Georgia fan. So I've known him for years, and I'm like, why don't you have you ever watched a Georgia game on stage? And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, I got the iPad down there. I got the iPad down there on Saturday nights watching Georgia games while I'm trying to keep up with the song, and so that's the fun. That's what the point of this model is. So Fringe Element podcast everywhere you get your SEC podcast. So
yeah, that's how I wanted.
go.
That's how I wanted you to close. Tell the audience. You just mentioned Fringe Element.
That's it, yeah.
I listen to every episode. Can you tell the audience all the rest, social media and all that rest of your work?
At Braden Gall for me, pretty simple. At 440 Sports, which is my local company here in Nashville. And then Fringe Element podcast is really the only one that SEC fans will care about. They'll probably like the cover 2 as well. We do for Athlon Sports, but the one I own, the one where I get to say whatever I want to say and I don't have to worry about anything is Fringe Element podcast. So it's on the YouTube page as well, 440 Sports. So 440 Sports on Twitter. Well, who knows where the future goes with it, but it's fun right now and it's profitable and we're having fun and we get to do whatever we want. So yeah, check it out for sure. Thank you for having me, man. I wish we could come in and do this anytime. So.
And it heavily features our buddy Stephen Lasson, who's on the show weekly. So if you can't get enough of Stephen Lasson, head on over to Fringe Element. You know what?
Yeah, he's also my co-host on the cover too. So like, just if you want as much Stephen Lasson as you can get, you listen to the two of us here. So.
All right, so hey, that is going to do it for this episode of the show. Just want to thank Braden Gall once again for taking the time, coming in person. I gave him some damn fine whiskey for doing it, but that was my way of saying thanks in person. But I hope you guys appreciated that. Going to try to do more of those now that the off season is right around the corner. So, hey, anytime I spot one of our SEC brethren coming to Nashville, I'm going to hit them up, try to get them in person. I love doing those. It's always a good time, and I think that was a great interview. And what a way to start the week of shows here. We've got a bowl game at the tail end of the week. Missouri playing in their bowl game. We got all kinds of action coming. So stay with us here. Cousin Shane will be back before you know it. I'll bring him back on the show. Just want to thank each and every one of you for continuing to check us out, and we'll catch you on the next one.